very happy to, and is Domenico online? Yes, he is. Great.
Yes, hello.
So I'm very happy to introduce Domenico Merante. He is a graduate of medicine at the University of Pisa in Italy. He's specialized in endocrinology and diabetes with a focus in diabetic neuropathy, neuropathic pain, and diabetic wound treatments. He's had a military service in the Italian Navy, where he served on a ship as chief medical officer called the Ammiraglio Magani. Is that right? Magahi?
Yes, Imagnaghi, yes. Imagnaghi, yeah.
And he's currently working for Vifor Pharma in Switzerland as a clinical research lead in nephrology and nephrology orphan diseases. He's practiced for over 20 years, including 12 years as an emergency medical room doctor at the NHS in Italy. He has 25 years of experience in global clinical development, half of which with Japanese organizations such as Daiichi Sankyo. And within the pharmaceutical and biotechnology environment. The other half of his career was in the lab with Guidodi, Novo Nordisk, Eli Lilly, and GSK in Italy and in the UK. Domenico has worked in clinical development programs in phase 1, 2, and 3 for pain treatments, antibiotics, antivirals, type 1 and type 2 diabetes, and diabetic complications, severe hypertension, metabolic and endocrine area, and the nephrology area in both the national and global scale. To date, Domenico has produced 99 publications as either the main or co-authors among full papers, abstract, and oral presentations. And with that, I'm looking forward to your presentation.
Thank you, Dr. Tada. Thank you to the organizers, particularly thank to Precision Evolution Global. It's been greatly supportive for the preparation and a fantastic agenda put in place. So with no further ado, I would like to share my presentation. And please, can you confirm that you can see it? That would be good.
Yes.
Is it working? Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much. Technology is a good thing, but sometimes can be tricky. So so as I mentioned, it's pleasure today that I have the opportunity to present this topic on precision and accuracy in fibromyalgia clinical development setting. And I have the experience in a case study, was an entire clinical development program I contributed to in phase 3 whilst I worked at Daiichi Sankyo. I am no conflict of interest. Thank you, Dr. Tala. You have already made the introduction. So I want to kick off here and talking about this speech in the context where we are today with the pandemic. One important information you surely are aware of is that quite a large number of clinical trials, so 36% of clinical trials over the last year or so, so for a total of over 2,000, were closed. And from clinicaltrials.gov, the reason explicitly mentioned was because of COVID-19. So nearly 130,000 patients in trials stopped due to COVID. And if we consider those who were anticipated to be enrolled in forthcoming studies, the number is absolutely massive. It exceeds 4 million patients. So this to set the scene, and this also is important because across all the clinical trial registries, you see which therapeutic area has been mostly impacted, and cardiovascular obviously is on top of the list, but then you have neurologic area, oncology, and pain, which actually the fibromyalgia pertains into. And you see obviously the impact in terms of percentage on the right-hand side of this slide. Now, fibromyalgia is an important, is a relevant disease, is a syndrome actually, and as in many other pain conditions, includes many endpoints which go across, those more widely defined regulatory endpoints, particularly pain and pain-associated endpoints, and then those endpoints which are actually very relevant to patients, which also include the tolerability and the side effects of the treatments, and overlapping the two with quality of life endpoints. So the importance of patient-reported outcomes is key in pain area, as in other therapeutic conditions. Fibromyalgia is characterized by pain as the central symptom, but you see, as I described, is a syndrome because it's characterized by not only by pain, which is chronic and generalized, and very difficult to treat, but also many pain-associated symptoms, which are very debilitating. These include sleep problems, fatigue, depression, and anxiety. Fibromyalgia is characterized by an amplified pain response, and the two major symptoms, in fact, of fibromyalgia due to this amplification of pain are hyperalgesia and allodynia. The features of pain are neuropathic of nature, but can be also nociceptive. And in fact, fibromyalgia pain is of a kind of mixed nature in that regard. Patients have been subgrouped in different clusters. One way to phenotype patients with fibromyalgia is grouping them in patients defined as low catastrophizers and high catastrophizers, and in between the two extreme, moderate catastrophizing. As you can see, patients, as you can see, anxiety and depression is very much embedded in the high catastrophizer subgroup of patients. So are those patients who have very little control over pain and high tenderness, which is also in group 3, so patients with high control over pain, so you find tenderness there also. Now, what matters here, and I want to bring to your attention, is the patient's experience, because we need always, when we design a clinical program or a clinical study, to understand the patient perspective. Now, this is a document that was published by the FDA in 2014 and collects the feedback on how patients from 3 different groups, from the National Fibromyalgia Partnership, for the National Fibromyalgia and Chronic Pain Association, and patients like me from fibromyalgia community, described pain due to fibromyalgia. You can see from the 400 comments submitted to this from these patients, you see fatigue is at the core of the symptoms, including sleep disturbances, cognitive function, this impairment, and depression, anxiety, alongside many others, of course, that we can disacknowledge. From direct experience, before at the time the phase 3 program was going to start in fibromyalgia, I had the opportunity and the fortune to liaise and network with fibromyalgia patient associations. This was one of my first contact with UK fibromyalgia patient associations, and I joined some meetings. This was run at the House of Commons in London, and I heard many things that really helped me and the team to understand fibromyalgia more, because the way they describe fibromyalgia is very important. So as an invisible disease, often suspected or diagnosed even as a mental health issue. They mostly are started being treated with antidepressants, and 50% nearly of patients rate the overall treatment as poor. There's a big impact acknowledged by the patients in terms of fibromyalgia impacting on families, friends, and employers. And I would say also from a patient's perspective, they acknowledge very little research in fibromyalgia clinical studies. And in fact, there are no drugs, by the way, approved in Europe for fibromyalgia. There are 3 instead approved in the US, which are pregabalin, duloxetine, and milnacipran. So there are also discrepancies and divergences in terms of the assessment of these drugs from the regulatory agencies. But importantly, nearly 80% of patients reported that the reason they were not happy with their treatment is because they are in constant pain. So this pain really hits them, is generalized, is difficult to treat, and is often severe. I looked into some most recently published paper, and looking obviously at the pandemic nowadays, it was important to also understand, how anxiety is characterized during the lockdowns because of COVID-19. And I've come across this paper recently published in November last year. You can see here amongst the nearly 500 patients, the feedback received from them in regard of the source of anxiety is various, but the highest impacting sources of anxiety were obviously from the top here of this graph. You can see the financial hardship, the access to medication, the eviction, the loss of their homes for some patients, working and study issues, job losses, family contracting. Then you go down to relationship, to traveling, of course, access to essential, and so forth. So big impact on this condition, as in many others, I would say, characterized by such a severe pain. For patients with level of anxiety even further increased, as we have seen, is already well part of the disease itself already, and obviously an amplification even further of chronic pain. The regulatory background in this condition is I would say, is rather let's say not harmonized, amongst agencies, to put it that way. And this is for instance, the way the European agency describes fibromyalgia. So the perspective of the European agency for fibromyalgia has a disease characterized by an unknown etiology, pathophysiology not well characterized. There are established diagnostic criteria that is good from the fibromyalgia, from the American College of Rheumatology. But still, is important for new drugs, for finding new drugs, to obviously have effects on pain and other pain-associated domains, the drug to be successful, and obviously showing maintenance of efficacy, and obviously looking at patients from different regions, not just from one region or another. But it's good to have regional data. And fibromyalgia is not an appropriate pain model. That is probably one of the tricky points. So for that reason, it's difficult to identify and investigate new drugs in this area. So because of this, I thought at some point to raise the attention of the regulators, of trying to, maybe in the near future to come up with maybe a harmonized global guidance on fibromyalgia to help developers, for future studies. Since that kind of activity, I decided to bring forward, based on my experience in this large phase 3 program. This program was named the ALDE. Was characterized by 3 identical large phase 3 studies. Is the design of those 3 studies run in different regions. Every one of these 3 studies had 1,200 patients. So these 3 studies were with 3,600 patients in total, and with 15 visits in each of the 3. Plus, there was an additional open-label extension study to demonstrate the long-term safety of this molecule in the class of the gabapentinoids named mirogabalin, with an additional 2,000 patients for 21 visits in this open label study. So in total, we're talking about a program of over 4,000 patients. So a very large program in fibromyalgia. The efficacy assessment and the safety assessment were complex, were quite several, as you can see here. This is the importance of, for precision and accuracy to capture, all these endpoints, with the electronic ePro system. So this what was done for accuracy reason. So capturing the pain, the responder rate, the brief pain inventory, and so forth, the sleep quality, the anxiety and depression, and so forth. Obviously, there were two adjudication committees, a hepatic adjudication committee and a data safety monitoring board, for particularly, looking into the safety of this molecule, and in fact the Columbia scale was in place, because this molecule pertains to the class of gabapentinoids, and the monitoring was very tight, very close. And the results were published in July 2019 by Professor Leslie Arnold. And we, at the end, showed the results. Unfortunately, it was quite a large placebo response, which was much higher than expected. And so the two dosing of this new molecule did not separate significantly across all the three studies from placebo. So the p-value was not reached in terms of statistical significance. Obviously we made sure that we acknowledged anyway all the sites, all the patients involved in this very large study. What we did also for sharing this experience with you was to obviously work closely with the patient groups. I mentioned already the UK patient groups, patient association in that report from the House of Commons, from that meeting at the House of Commons, but we worked also with other patient associations in Germany, Spain, Norway, Netherlands, and US. So it was a very tight collaboration before and during the course of this phase 3 program. So there was a strategy in place, and obviously that helped in raising awareness of the disease, helped in obviously increasing motivation for the patients. Obviously, the study was done before the pandemic, so there were no issues in terms of traveling for these patients. But obviously, there were challenges due to frequency of visits, as I mentioned, and the number of assessments and procedures. And obviously, the raising awareness campaign had materials, leaflets, all approved by the ethics, the IRBs, and this was all in place. And we had an excellent enrollment and retention, which were one of the best across the all programs ever conducted in fibromyalgia. Now, we also utilized, for accuracy and precision, the electronic ePro systems, and I fully convinced that they are absolutely necessary, particularly in pain area, because of the number of questionnaires involved amongst primary and secondary endpoints, as you have seen, and these are extremely important to obviously handling tackling the issue of missing data in pain clinical studies. If they are used correctly, they are reliable, and data are accurate and can be easily collected. I would say, obviously, previous, the necessary essential training. This electronic system can be integrated in a clinical study design. This can start actually earlier stage, phase 1B, in some areas like oncology, for instance, looking at pain, or phase 2 for a pain program. And they are important because they can obviously capture all this information in regards of the study endpoints, and the value obviously is increased because of these devices. So after we published the results from the primary manuscript I showed to you earlier, we acknowledged the patients. We also wanted to share some lessons we learned through this program, but also we wanted to share also the benefits that the program brought to the patients, including the use of these electronic devices and the raise, the campaign, and the collaboration with patients groups, and the increase campaign awareness on fibromyalgia, and obviously trying to help and to support and to alleviate pain in these patients as much as that was possible. So I want to finish this last few slides here in my presentation, say it was very key, these active collaborations with patient groups and associations for the design and for the conduct of this large clinical program. So it's important what we have learned, that is essential, I would say, learning from the patient's experience and perspective, trying to actively learn, actively listen to patients, and capture all the feedback, all the advices, all the relevant symptoms that they, tell us, in order to tailor the study to fulfill, yes, the regulatory requirements, but also to make sure that patient endpoints are well captured in an arena, as I've showed to you, which is quite difficult because the lack of existence of a global harmonized guidelines. So this is my last slide to you. Basically, I've just put some consideration for future trials. So basically, we heard the importance of digital technologies, particularly nowadays during this pandemic. But I think many things were already in place even before COVID-19. Just now, I think this pandemic has given an extra push to really move and shift towards, the more use of these digital technologies. So, and this allows obviously developers to reevaluate, to reassess the clinical trial process, including obviously the patient perspective, but also reducing costing and maximizing the benefits, the level of accuracy and precisions of our clinical studies. So it is important to reconsider the patient journey more carefully, and this is an opportunity for all of us to do so. Reconsider the potential of reducing number of visits, making the visits more easy, if that is possible, with less frequency and lower frequency, maybe less procedures, unless obviously necessary. The technologies of the digital technologies will obviously help, and this will be even more relevant, particularly in conditions like today due to this pandemic. Considering also other alternatives of facilitating, decentralizing also could translate in delivering the clinical supplies to the patients directly, do more remote monitoring, but obviously not reduce, but increase actually the monitoring if that is as that is very important, and reassess continuous risk-based monitoring of our studies, optimizing the using of existing data and making interaction with regulatory agencies and with our patient groups and associations more meaningful. And I stop here and thank you for your attention.
Terrific talk. There's a lot here for not just for fibromyalgia, but for clinical trials across the therapeutic areas. I think that we can all benefit from the tools that you've shared. One of the questions I had for you was around, in oncology, we're still learning this lesson, right? That you can't treat all, for example, lung cancer the same. That every patient's tumor is unique, and so in addition to the patient sort of stratification that you do with symptoms, are there other things in fibromyalgia that you can do to better define patient populations that might better respond to certain therapies?
Yes, I mean there are other ways to identify maybe better clustering patients in fibromyalgia. It's not so easy though, I have to say, because markers are not particularly, finding markers there is not obviously, valid. They are not validated. They are not, but definitely this brain imaging can help also to understand more upfront, but not for a large phase 3 program. I would say something maybe at earlier stage, during an exploratory phase 2, yes, or even earlier. There can be ways to more define, these different clusters of fibromyalgia. But it's all a work on progress. It's not an easy one though, I have to say.
Yeah, I imagine it's particularly since we don't really understand the disease, and quite honestly, in medical school, I was taught that tricyclic antidepressants were the treatment of choice for fibromyalgia, which is 20 years ago that was insane, but that's what that's how it was taught to us.
And it's so true that two of these, for instance, the duloxetine and milnacipran, are approved in the US and some other countries also because they impact on the descending pathway. So the descending modulatory pathway, which is serotonin and norepinephrine mediated. So that is also a way to trying to impact on this pain amplification, because there's a distortion of the amplification of pain in these patients. So the modulator effect is more or less lost, and that is one of the major reasons of this amplified pain.
Okay, well, thank you. Are there any other questions, Sam?
I don't believe so. If anyone has questions for him after the event, we can always connect you with Domenico. I want to thank you again, Domenico, for your presentation.
And my profile is in LinkedIn, by the way. And yes, I'm happy the organizers to share my email address for questions.
Wonderful. Thank you again. And I'll be transferring everyone to the next session.
Thank you. Thank you very much.